The free agency is starting this Friday, and we have Rockets insider Kelly Eco on the show to discuss everything Rockets. We're going to be giving an update on James Harden. We're going to be talking about Fred VanVleet potentially getting the max, some guys that may be traded, and some other guys the Rockets may be targeting. So stay tuned for this episode of the Bradeaux Will Show. You don't want to miss it.
All right, welcome back to the episode of the Bradeaux and Will Show. I'm your first host, Will. As always, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Bias Houston. I'll quickly shout out the Bradeaux and Will page. We just hit 1,000 subscribers, so we really appreciate y'all's support on that front. And I'll pass it off to Brad.
Yeah, as always, Bradeaux NBA, Instagram, Twitter. That's where you can find me. Favorite stats, highlights, I got y'all covered. Make sure y'all tap the subscribe button. We appreciate y'all for a K, as Will mentioned. We're going to try to run it up soon, maybe hit 2K soon. But Kelly, man, we appreciate you again for coming on the show.
Yes, sir.
Insider, Mr. Ecosystem himself. So go ahead and tell people where they can find you.
Twitter, Instagram, Kelly Eco. It's KELLYIKO. Subscribe to The Athletic. Subscribe to the Ecosystem, wherever you get your podcasts, and let's run it up.
Yeah, we're going to run it up, and we're definitely going to talk about this free agency stuff because Rockets Twitter has been going wild right now about Fred VanVleet, but we're going to kick it to him later. We're going to start off with a guy named James Harden. You know, there's been an update on him, and it's looking like he might just stay in Philadelphia. So what have you been hearing on that front?
Yeah, so, in recent days and weeks, it just feels like, that camp has kind of shifted their priorities towards staying in Philadelphia over, the potential emotional return to Houston. It just feels like from a basketball perspective, this Rockets team is not yet, structured out. There's still things they have to put in place. They're still in the middle of a rebuild. They don't seem like they're willing to give him the max or near max money he's looking for. And, when you look at the conferences, East and West, the Western Conference is a bloodbath. And you could make the argument that the Eastern Conference is wide open, coming off of a season where a team like the Miami Heat made it all the way to the NBA Finals, and the Sixers were up 3-2 against the Boston Celtics in the second round. And if not for a second half collapse, they could have been in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then from that point, any man's game. So when you look at the landscape, also bringing in Nick Nurse, a guy that's going to bring some innovation, bring some tweaks, some changes to the offensive system that was kind of stale in that second round, particularly. All that makes sense. And then just looking at his career, because if he came back, if he had come back on a short term deal, if something goes wrong, now you might be in a situation where you have to trade him again, and that that whole thing could be a whole emotional mess. And I don't think the Rockets are trying to go down that path again. So I think both sides understand that it's best that they stay apart.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, so you kind of touched on John Lucas potentially going to Philadelphia.
Right.
Yeah. What was up with that?
So when you look at whenever Daryl, James, the old gang was in Houston, John Lucas has always been a big part of everything going on. And with James losing Sam Cassell, his guy in Philadelphia, there's a sense that they've been aggressively going after John Lucas to try and see if he would join on the staff in some kind of role. There is also a job for him in Houston, and from what I understand, it's more of a liaison type role, trying to like between the front office and also with the player development, because as you all know, he's pretty much grandfathered into that organization. Like he's been there through thick and thin, and from top to bottom, there is an enormous amount of respect for John Lucas. So the ball is in his court because up until now, he's kept things pretty close to his vest on what he wants to do. Still going through his options, but it's on the table.
Yeah, aside from the James Harden noise, it's been looking like, Fred VanVleet is going to sign this $83.6 million 2-year max. Short-term deal. The Rockets mentioned they weren't trying to give out any long-term money, so they're going with the short-term max for Fred VanVleet. But, the Rockets have a little bit over $60 million in cap space, Kelly. So if they're giving Fred VanVleet this max, my ultimate question is, what do they plan to do with the rest of that cap space? Because it looks like they only have around 20 years left after that signing.
So I'm not sure of the exact figures for Van Vliet, but I do know that they're targeting shorter term contracts at more money, and the idea is, if you look at it, it kind of gives both guys flexibility. You're allowed to, from a player's perspective, players want that freedom of movement, they want that ability to move around, and then from the team perspective, if things don't go how they as they plan, you can always trade that contract and move on. So for Fred VanVleet, if they were to give him a max, I think it was like 40 something million, that would only leave 20 24 million and change for two more guys. So you would have to assume that someone's coming for the mid level, and I don't think that that's realistic. I think guys like Dillon Brooks and Brook Lopez can get probably more than a mid level. But there are some ways to open up more space, and that's why you hear of them trying to consolidate some players and open up a little bit more room, because if you can get to 70 million, maybe 68, now you have a little bit more wiggle room to try and bring in some more guys. So I think that's what the plan is.
Okay. And I wanted to touch on really quickly about, Fred VanVleet coming in. Let's say, this is a guy who's going to come in on a 2-year deal, hypothetically. And then Amin would probably take over right after. Let's say the Rockets think Amin Thompson is ready before that 2-year window. Is this a guy the Rockets expect to move off ball, Fred VanVleet, and potentially maybe even start Amin in that kind of scenario? What do you think happens there? You think there's any scenario Fred would even want to come off the bench? I couldn't imagine them.
No, I don't think so.
Yes, exactly.
Not for that money. Not for that money. But so my personal opinion, if Fred comes, is that it's kind of how the NFL used to have it, where you would bring in a top guy, top quarterback, and he would learn the system under, the incumbent starter, and then in 2 years' time, he would eventually be phased out. Because I could imagine in 2 years' time, I'm not sure if Fred VanVleet wants to retire as a Rocket. So, the good thing about those short-term deals is that, so let's say after a year he wants to go and go play for a contender, there's an easy out. Like if the Rockets gave him a 1+1 and he wanted to go play for a contender in year 2, I don't think there'd be any problems on the Houston side, because Alman Thompson would have had a year under his belt, and if development goes right, he could be given the keys in year 2. But that's just an example. But the good thing about having guys like Amen on your roster now is that there's time and patience to develop those guys, surround them with the right assistant coaches, to make sure everything goes smoothly.
Gotcha.
And then, we've been linked to Fred a lot. And then the other guy we've been linked to a lot is Brook Lopez. I know you said today you think you're a little bit more like closer to 50-50 on him potentially coming back or not. But what do you think the Rockets will pivot to if they do miss out on Brook Lopez?
So one name that I heard that they had on their list previously was Naz Reid, but obviously he's not coming to Houston. But for some reason, the free agent market this time around for big men is not as robust as you would have liked. But I'm pretty sure they have other names in mind. They have a big contingency plan if they don't get Brook or something. So if that doesn't happen, I think something else will work out.
Yeah. I was hearing the stuff with Capella, maybe trading, a guy like Jason Tate, take back like 14 million. I saw that scenario thrown into play. But yeah, I've been curious to see what they do in that instance. Like Kelly's got something going on real quick. We'll give him a quick second. But yeah, man, it's something real quick. Fred VanVleet, if y'all haven't been listening, Twitter Spaces are really jumping right now. Will and I have some good conversations. And those are always great conversations to pull up to if you haven't. But yeah, I was also gonna have Will plug the watch party.
My bad.
You good.
All right, yeah. So ultimate question now. Dillon Brooks. It looks like that's almost a lock at this point. If Dillon Brooks isn't the guy, is Bruce Brown a guy they go to? Is there a way they get Dillon Brooks and Bruce Brown? Or is it looking like a one or the other kind of thing?
So on Houston's big board, obviously Dillon Brooks is the top wing target, but Bruce Brown is up there. Cam Johnson is high up there. With Cam, it's kind of harder because he's restricted, but all three of those guys are going to be on their radar come June 30th. So, is there a way to get 2 of them? I'm not sure, because Cam's going to get paid. Bruce is probably going to get around the mid level. So, I struggle to see how they could get 2 of those top names, but nothing's impossible.
Before I kick it to Wolf for the next question, when it comes to Cam Johnson, he looks like a guy that's going to be getting a deal that's longer than 2 years. Would the Rockets even sign him to a deal longer than 2 years? I've seen people like Detroit willing to offer him maybe $100 million, right, on that 4-year deal. The Rockets don't seem like a team willing to even, commit long-term money to somebody. So is Cam Johnson really an option if it's longer than 2 years?
He is, but I mean, for guys like Cam, I think they're a bit different because of their age and their profile. Cam is a legit 3-and-D wing. That kind of fits, in my opinion, fits smoother than the Dillon Brooks or whatever. But um, Cam's gonna get paid. Let's face it. And I've heard the Nets are obviously they're going to give him somewhere in that range, 95 to 100 million, potentially, because he's at the age where he fits to a lot of teams' profiles in terms of 3-and-D, can guard 1 through 4, can shoot over 30% from three. That's very highly sought after. So for a team like the Rockets, I still think I would assume if I was Houston and Cam was available, I would be offering like a 2 or 3 year deal, honestly, because you want to maintain as much flexibility as possible from now, going forward. I think the name of the game, the NBA is changing, and I think the days of guys teams looking for 4 or 5 year deals are over because now anything can happen at any point in time. So you want to give yourself an easy out, in the worst case scenario.
And okay, and then you talked about you kind of touched on a little bit earlier about certain guys being kind of moved for some more cap flexibility this off season. So some of the names that kind of got floated out there, obviously the KJ Martins of the world. He seems to be one of the most attractive trade pieces. But then you also mentioned Josh Christopher and Usman Garuba. So like, is there like I guess where are you right now with those guys potentially being moved?
So I'm gonna start with KJ. So it feels like that camp is bracing for the possibility of getting traded. As the days continue to come on, it just feels like we're getting closer to a solution because looking at the roster and like the minutes available, when you bring in Cam Whitmore, you still have Tari Eason, you're going to bring in another wing. It just feels like he's the odd man out again, and that sucks for KJ because he came from a situation where last season he wasn't happy because Eric Gordon and Tari, and then he's going through it again. So it just feels like we're getting close to a KJ Martin trade. I just don't know exactly when that'll be, but I feel like we're getting closer. And
know
then
what it would be for, or is it just a player?
so for KJ, honestly, my gut tells me that if they're going to move KJ, it would be for some kind of draft compensation to open up, a little bit more of that cap room, like in case they have to overpay for somebody, and then you want to go get another target, and you need maybe a couple more million to get it done. I think that would be, my guy. Because if you trade KJ for, like, if you trade him to the Clippers, and you want, like, say Covington back, now you're taking on less money. Like, you have less money available to play with in the summer, which isn't really smart. If you're going to add someone like Covington, so you want to give yourself maximum flexibility. So if you can move KJ for a future first or a couple of futures, like a pair of seconds, then I think that's how you get it done.
Quick question. The Rockets still have to make a decision tomorrow on KJ Martin and Daishen Nix. Something I wanted to bring up. When it comes to Daishen Nix, is that a guy you think that they're cutting tomorrow? And then KJ, you think they're picking that up?
So in regards to Knicks, I just can't see a future there. I think from point guard room alone, you have now and Thompson, whoever you bring in free agency, it's Kevin Porter Jr. to some extent, Ty Washington, last year's first round pick. It doesn't make sense to carry 5 point guards on the roster. So I mean, I think he's the odd man out there as well. And then what was the other question? Oh, for KJ. Yeah, I mean, if they're going to trade him, you kind of have to pick that option up before you trade him. So I think that's the likeliest outcome for KJ. Like, it's the team to pick up the option and then find out a trade for him.
Got it. You want to take this next one, Will?
Yeah. If I'm honestly, I'm kind of confused on what this question is. You said I'm in Thompson starting.
So is there any scenario Obviously it's looking like, yeah, I see you laughing. There's been a lot of discussion lately. People want Ahmed Thompson to start. He's fourth pick in the
Right.
draft. The question
Right.
was circulating, hey, you just picked this guy fourth overall in the draft, so why are we not starting him? So obviously, if you bring a guy like Fred VanVleet, he's got that experience over in Ahmed Thompson. But say Fred VanVleet doesn't come, obviously Harden's not going to come. Let's say hypothetically they get a guy like Monte Morris, right? So who, is given the keys in this kind of scenario, or is it more of a just like, hey, you're going to earn your spot kind of thing?
So similar to the draft where the front office goes through a number of plans in terms of like potential surprises, that also applies to free agency. So for example, there is a route that says, what if Fred stays in Toronto? What if he goes elsewhere? There have been some discussions, like some plans among the myriad of plans talked about in the air. There have been some plans to say, if they don't get one of those two top point guards, go hard after a guy like Bruce Brown, who's still on their list, who can also handle the ball some, and that would still give room to let Amen grow into that role, get more minutes under his belt. Now, for for Amen and Cam, they don't want to do the same thing they did with Jalen and Jabari, which is those guys were thrown to the fire, thrown to the wolves, and forced to survive, right? They want to do that. They want to be intentional about his development. They want to be structured, and they want to be, system oriented. So for Amen Thompson, I think if it's to start, if it's to come off the bench, there's a plan in place. The assistant coaching staffs, Ben Sullivan, all those guys, they're going to make sure, that everything is done with precision, with intention and with the purpose. So if it's coming off the bench, great. If it's starting, great. But just know that the Rockets, as of today, they know exactly what they're going to do or what they're going to try to do, come June 30th.
So, and then you talk about bringing in a veteran point guard, bringing in some vets. Obviously, that means somebody who Rockets fans want to see play next season probably isn't going to play. So, do you know kind of who that guy would potentially be? Is in terms of like who end up get some minutes next season from this young core?
So, going back to what Ime kind of said, and this is also goes back to a conversation that the front office had with the players after last season in terms of nothing is going to be guaranteed going forward. You guys won 21 games, 20 games the year before. This is year 3 of a rebuild, year 4 if you want to consider the COVID year. But, if you're going to add 3 vets to this roster who are coming in expecting to play, there's going to be some pretty fierce competition. So I think from the front office perspective, it doesn't matter who starts, but it still matters to an extent that, Tari plays. It still matters that Jabari plays. It still matters that Jalen plays. It still matters that Alpi plays. Like those core 4 guys, I think it's important that their development goes to plan because that was the whole point of the rebuild, right? Was to bring in those guys and grow them into winnable NBA players. So it wouldn't make sense just to discard them by the wayside just because you're bringing in, older, experienced guys. The whole point is to bring guys to augment that process, right? You want to bring guys that is going to help Jalen become a better player, Jabari become a better player, Tari, Alpi. Like if they get supplanted in the lineup, that's another thing. But the whole purpose of free agency is to add and improve your roster. So however that decision comes about is up to Ime, and that can't be determined in June or July. That's going to come in September, October, the early training camps, those preseason games. So until then, we won't know.
Yeah, and before I kick it to Will for this next question, I wanted to ask about, Tate Washington, a guy who they drafted last year. It's looking like a lot of these guys could potentially be moved, as we've talked about. But, is Tate Washington a guy that they like ultimately, or they're not looking to trade him, or since he's still extremely young, or you think everybody's on the table?
I think everyone's on the table, honestly. I mean, I personally like Tate, and I wouldn't just discard him so quickly because he didn't really get a chance to show what he could do, right? No, this is a guy you took late in the first round who, still showed he can be a capable point guard, but he needs confidence. But now the problem is you brought in a much improved version, 6'6", 6'7", legitimate defender, 1 through 4, sometimes 1 through 5, jump out the gym, point guard, and Amen Thompson. So, and you still have Scoot, who, even though the coaching staff might not consider him a traditional point guard, can still handle the ball, some can still bring the ball up the floor on some occasions, and set up offense. It's going to be tough. Similar to how Knicks was in a tough spot last season, I think Tate could be in a similar spot. He'll have to have a tremendous summer league to really put a dent in that roster next season.
That makes sense.
So what were your thoughts on Cam Whitmore sliding to pick 20 draft night?
Yeah, that was surprising. That was surprising. It felt to me like, as the teams pick on the clock and players are getting selected, it seems like the whole thing about Cam not being a great interview, it felt like that was a snowball effect. And some teams that didn't do as much homework on him, the more he slid, they kind of had their own questions as to, is it a health thing? Is it something that we don't know about? And teams just opted for other guys on their boards. So for Houston, they always had Cam. There was a long period of time where Cam was being seriously discussed as him or, those guys like Thompson and the Thompson twins and Anthony Black and stuff like that. So once he was available, and the Rockets tried, like they called, like the minute it went past pick 9, pick 10, like they were calling every team trying to see if they can move up. And 2 times they had deals in place with teams that said, okay, we'll agree to move back if our guy is not here. But on both times their guy was there. So the Rockets kind of fell into a very lucky and fortunate situation where 2 of the guys that they had high on their board were available, and it was a grand slam of a draft night.
Wanted to add something really quickly. Throwing it back. Last free agency question. It just came to my mind. When it comes to Dillon Brooks, right? Udoka said that he wanted to bring in a guy that was, mature, professional. I personally don't think that describes Dillon Brooks. I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Maybe he's contradicting himself because it looks like he's every favorite to sign with the Rockets, but then he says he wants mature and professional. So it's a guy who led the league in texts. So
Yeah.
What do you think?
That point is interesting. I will say this, but first and foremost, Ime is gonna cling to guys that earn their living on defense. And for all of Dillon Brooks' antics, he's a hard-nosed, hell of a defender. Yes, he got caught up in the LeBron storm and, social media and poking the bear and saying things he probably could take back if he could. But, coming into a situation like Houston, where you have a locker room of young guys that are looking for that know-how, looking for that defensive mindset, Dillon brings that in spades. And if he can come in and come under Ime Udoka's, culture and just trying to instill that into the young guys, yeah, his shooting splits aren't great. And he had a down year compared to, his previous time in Memphis. But I just feel like that whole season in Memphis was just a cluster. Yeah, it was just so much going on behind the scenes, and it was just a mess on the floor, and it came apart at the worst time. But I still think Dillon Brooks is a good NBA player. He just needs to be in a system where development is at the forefront, and so is defense. So I think coming to Houston, you have an opportunity to change that narrative and kind of rewrite the culture.
Yeah, we're talking about in the space today. They just need to lock him and Almond in the gym with Ben Sullivan for the entire summer.
Yeah, that shooting form is nasty. Dillon Brooks shooting form is unique. I'll say that.
Definitely.
And then what are your thoughts on Jabari and Tari? It's something you just kind of you tweeted out now that they're going to be playing in Summer League.
Yeah, so I mean, Ben Sullivan, from what I understand, is going to be the team's head coach for Summer League. But Jabari and Tari playing out there, and I think it's going to be like a game. But just to get on the floor, like just showing that commitment to the franchise. Like you want to go and be better. You guys didn't have the greatest season last year, although they impressed and they had some real momentum down the stretch. You still want to get on the floor. You still want to show up for your teammates and kind of help Amen, Cam, Tate get things going. So I think it's a good idea. Now I'm not saying they got to go there and play 4 quarters of all, because the talent level in some league is considerably less, but it's good to get the legs going. It would be good for those guys to get some early in-game exposure to their new assistant coaches, who are all going to be over there in Vegas. It's going to be it's kind of like a cheat code in terms of learning the stuff before training camp starts. So they should have a leg up on the rest of the guys once, camp comes around.
Nice. I didn't know Ben Sullivan was about to be the head coach. Is that breaking news, Kelly? Did you put that on the TV?
Yeah, because I was going to put it out tomorrow. So
I appreciate you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Last thing that we had today, there's speculation on the TL. Rockets just changed their profile picture. They got
my God,
old school retro jersey. You heard anything about that? What's going on?
I haven't heard anything about that. But hey, they need some kind of change. So if it brings them good luck, I'm all for it. But last season, if you think about it, the logo they've had for so long, I wouldn't say it's gotten stale, but every now and then you could benefit from a rebrand, right? So if it sticks, I think they should crowdsource and kind of because there's some really talented guys out there that could put together some really nice, I've seen some logos here and there and stuff like that. So if they're serious about trying to do a rebrand and stuff like that for the new culture, the new generation, phase 2, I think that would be something I would get on board with, but we'll see.
Definitely. And we'll close here. Free agency as a whole, it's just coming up very soon. We're just going to ask you, what's your prediction on what goes down ultimately? Like, what are the things that you're most certain about happens, come this Friday?
I think Dillon Brooks will be a Rocket. I think I'm still torn on Brook Lopez. I saw the interview today on ESPN, NBA Today. Talked about wanting to win, but he also mentioned wanting to help guys grow. He wanted to be around guys that you can help them elevate themselves personally. I'm still kind of torn on him. If the Rockets can put, they might have to overpay for that guy, honestly, and all their guys really, because this is a situation where what you're getting into coming to Houston. This is a team that won 22 games, 21 games, has been the bottom of the barrel of the Western Conference for 3 years running. So, can they get Fred VanVleet? I think so, but it's going to take, somewhere in that range of, 40 million, anywhere between 35 and 42 million annually to get that guy to come over, because, he's leaving a pretty good situation in Toronto. Although you could argue that the Raptors are stuck in third gear as well. But, I think they can get their guys. For a long time I thought they were going to get James, but obviously stuff changed. But in regards to like VanVleet, Dillon Brooks, I think they can get them if they really put the money where their mouth is. Brook Lopez to me is the wild card.
Gotcha. All right, well, that's all we have for today.
Sure.
Kelly, again, as always, we gotta appreciate you for joining the show.
For sure.
For myself, y'all always know where to find me at Bradeaux NBA, Instagram and Twitter.
Yep.
I'm a lot more active on Instagram lately, so y'all tap in there. And Kelly, man, go ahead and play your stuff.
Yeah, so just follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Kelly Ego. That's KELLYIKO. Subscribe to The Athletic. We got a $1 a month sale going on right now. Best time to hop on board. We also subscribe to the ecosystem. Just had Jeff Van Gundy on. Should have some more content coming for this summer. And just keep tapping in. I appreciate the love and support always.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. I did check out the Van Gundy podcast this morning, so
I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, y'all can check that out if y'all get the time. And yeah, as always, y'all can find me Instagram, Twitter, at Bias Houston. That's all we got for you today, though. Hope you guys learned some, and we'll hopefully have Kelly on another time, man. Kelly's been on the show so many times now, so hopefully we'll get him on sometime later. But
for sure,
appreciate you, Kelly. Appreciate y'all for listening, and we'll be here next time.